Hey everybody, welcome on. I want to make sure that as folks are jumping on here that you guys are getting all situated and everything. I'm going to go ahead and wait for a few more folks you guys to jump on before we start the presentation. But go ahead and get ready to answer some questions and ask some questions in the Q&A box that'll pop up. So go ahead and have that ready before we do the big introduction and I jump into the presentation here.
Thank you, Gabrielle. So firstly, just good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Managing and Motivating Your Remote Workforce and Getting the Most Done Working from Home by Gabrielle Bosché. Today, you are listening using your computer speaker system by default. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to Gabrielle by typing them into the questions pane on the control panel. Gabrielle will answer these questions throughout the presentation. To give a brief introduction on today's presenter, Gabrielle is known as America's Millennial expert. She is one of the most requested speakers on generational leadership and millennial motivation. Gabrielle is the best-selling author of 4 books on her generation, including 5 Millennial Myths, The Handbook for Managing and Motivating Millennials. Gabrielle has been featured on NPR, SiriusXM, Fox Business, Time, and others for her work on generation. Gabrielle's popular TEDx talk, Challenges Whether Millennials Will Be the Next Great Generation, has taken her to stages around the world. Gabrielle is the founder and president of the Millennial Solutions based in Texas. I will now hand this over to Gabrielle. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And hey there from Texas. It is about 8 o'clock at night right now, so the sun is setting currently. But I am very excited to join you in your morning to be able to chat with you about how do you manage and motivate a remote workforce. So I want you guys to jump on the chat right now, and I want to hear from how many of you have already been, before this crisis and folks were working from home, how many of you were already working from home? How many of you were already managing teams that were remote? Go ahead and put in the chat bar yes or no. I just want to hear, based off of kind of get a baseline of how engaged your workers already are. So I want to go ahead and see in the chat bar how many of you guys already have, before all of this, been working from home or managing your workforce from home. So we've got a couple people saying no, so this is new. Sandra says no. Go ahead, and as we're doing this presentation here, I want this to be as interactive as possible to be able to answer your questions. And so I'm going to be sharing with you some of the best practices that we've cultivated, that we've studied, and we've delivered for top clients around the world. So it looks like we've got quite a few. Fabulous says yes, already working from home, love it. Our whole team works from home. Joanne says yes. Ellie says yes, so great. It looks like as those answers keep coming in, getting a good split of folks who are looking for how to improve what they're already doing. And some folks are saying, hey, this is new. How do I manage my time? And how do I make sure that the people on our team are managing their time as well? So again, if you have questions, by all means, go ahead. I'm going to be monitoring the chat bar throughout this conversation this morning. So go ahead and light up the chat bar. I'll try and get to all of your questions. So now we're in a new season where working from home is no longer a luxury. It's no longer something that you have to work yourself up to. Really, what we're starting to see is it's a must. And currently, because of what's going on in the world, more and more companies are not only requiring it, but their pure survival is based off of being able to work from home, which has all the pros and cons in the world. I mean, we've got plenty of examples of, folks joining conference calls not realizing that their camera was on, and maybe they weren't necessarily ready, if you know what I mean, to be seen on camera. We've got other folks who have set up, virtual offices. We love our virtual backgrounds with Zoom. There's so many fun ways to be able to utilize the technology, which I'm going to talk about, and really make sure that it works for you. There's also some great benefits that I've personally started to acknowledge, that I think that the standard of what you need to look like in front of your coworkers has absolutely gone down, where, before we used to try really hard, come into work, put on all the airs, and then now it's, mostly like pajamas and maybe a top bun. So the relationship that we now have with our coworkers is a bit more personal than maybe it has been in the past. And so how do we navigate some of those waters? We are going to be talking about that. So in the chat bar, I want to hear from you guys what are the biggest challenges that you have when it comes to managing and motivating your remote workforce. The big challenge that you have managing and motivating your workforce. And I'll make sure to address those during our time here. When you have that main issue, maybe it's managing someone who is not used to working from home, so making sure they're getting their work done. Maybe it's managing your own time. We're certainly going to talk about time management best practices. But I just want to make sure that as we're going through this time, that I'm specifically going to be answering your biggest challenge when it comes to managing and motivating that workforce. So some backstory on me. I founded a firm focused specifically on generational reconciliation. That means we spend a majority of our time working with organizations that have Generation Z, so people born after 1997, so usually under 22 years old. We have organizations that have Millennials, so those that are anywhere between 23, 24, and 38. Generation X, that generation born between 1965 and 1981, and then we've got baby boomers, 1946, born between 1946 and 1964, and traditionalists. So we work in a world where technology is one of the biggest things that folks don't agree on. Is, should I text you? Should I message you? Is it what IM handle are you on right now? Can I email you? Are you on Facebook Messenger? All of the different mediums in which we communicate today. So one of the biggest challenges we've seen working with these multi-generational teams has been centered around managing and motivating folks who not only work in different locales, but have different ways of working and being able to effectively communicate those expectations. So my big promise for our time here is that you are going to understand the three main ways that you're going to be able to manage your remote workforce and three main strategies to motivate them to not only do their work well, but to live a better life and be more committed to you as well. And from there, we're going to give you an opportunity to get a copy of our brand new book, Keep Them Longer, for free. So I'm going to share with you how you can do that at the end. So how do you manage a remote workforce? Today, there are so many tools out there. We're using one of them, Zoom. There's things like Slack. There's just plain old text messaging. The key is being able to make sure that you're using a platform that works for you. One of the big questions that I oftentimes get is, well, Gabrielle, that works when everyone's on the same page. What do you do when not everyone enjoys or is using the platform that we have selected? So one of the ways that you can do that is, first and foremost, you want to make sure everyone's comfortable with whatever the platform is. But if there is someone who's perhaps not an early adopter when it comes to some of the best practices that you're wanting to use with tech, what I'll do is put them in charge of training everyone else on that technology. What does that do? When you have someone say, Joe doesn't really like Zoom, he prefers, phone calls, but everyone else is doing Zoom, rather than, trying to drag Joe through the mud to enjoy or even just show up on Zoom calls, we put Joe in charge of coordinating and making sure everyone else is on the call, and put him in charge of making sure other people understand it. And it's actually a really powerful way on a psychological level to be able to get them to have buy-in, because when you're teaching something to someone else, you're actually teaching yourself. So if you have someone on the team who's not really enjoying whatever platform that you've decided, there's always going to be that one person. Put them in charge of teaching other folks. It's also too important to get a platform that's going to make sense and have buy-in from as many people on the team as you possibly can. So my team, for example, we use Slack, and the reason that we found Slack was because we actually went out to our team and said, here's a problem. So rather than saying, we need to get a program, we came up with a problem. One of the key things that we all need to keep in mind is that everything in life comes down to problems and solutions. So as employers, as employees, as people in the community, everyone is just playing a role somewhere in the exchange of problems to solutions. So instead of, as the boss, for example, me coming into my employees and saying, hey, we need to get this solution, we presented the problem. So we said, hey, the problem is that we are using all these different mediums and information is getting lost. Then we paused. Then we asked our team, how do you think we can solve this problem? It was incredible. The difference between asking people to fix a problem by coming up with a solution themselves versus just saying, go find the solution, is night and day. So I would encourage you, even something as simple as what platform you're going to use, take that problem solution mindset with you to present something to the folks on your team to get that buy-in. Because there's nothing worse than switching locations, switching roles, even switching responsibilities as we're all changing the way that we're doing work and not feeling like you have a semblance of control. Because that is one of the most fundamental lessons that I want to get through to you here today, is why we have a hard time managing people from home. Sure, you can say it's because, you know, some people don't necessarily have a dedicated workspace, or their kids are at home, or the dog's barking and maybe they're just distracted, they're doing laundry in the middle of a conference call. All of those things certainly I think are the case. But it's really important to keep in mind that when people are not thriving while working from home, because they've really lacked a sense of control. And control can be seen as very bad, as in manipulating people and doing terrible things. But control is also really important because it means that there's confidence, that there's continuity, that people feel like they know what they're doing. And that's important. That's the type of control that we're talking about. So finding ways for your employees to have a sense of control about their day is one of the most fundamental aspects of managing and motivating your team from home. So say they have a list of things that they need to do that day. Rather than having a reaction to what it is that they're supposed to do, we now give them a roadmap to be able to control their time and decide when and how they're doing that particular task. So empowering your employees to be a part of, again, solving the problem rather than just saying coming up with the solution is going to be a very different way that we're going to be moving forward here with this new economy. Now, before I jump into the 3 core management strategies that I want to share with you, I do want to share with you, based off of some of the research and the work that we've been doing on generations, some research that I think is pretty interesting when it comes to the workforce as it is now. Now, as someone who has studied generations for about 10 years, I've written 5 books on generations. I've got my 6th coming out in the fall. It's fascinating to me to see how different age groups are reacting during this season, where we have some who are very much falling into, I think, some of their stereotypical kind of roles, and then some that are really surprising us. So I'm going to share with you, for management purposes, some of the trends that we're starting to see from around the world of how different generations are engaging with this crisis. And then I'm going to share with you some of the core elements of leading each generation, because it's really, really fundamental to have an awareness of who it is that you're managing and who you're leading. So as I shared with you before, there are really 5 generations right now that are really playing a fundamental role here in our economy worldwide. We have Generation Z, Millennials, Generation X, Baby Boomers, and then of course the traditionalists, which are the older generations. So what we've really found is, particularly when it comes to the role each of these generations have played, it's really been fascinating to see how they've reacted, but also too, how this is going to impact them moving forward. I'll briefly share with you some of those elements here today. So Generation Z is that younger generation. They've been kind of given that, many of them are still in school, so their classes are being disrupted. Their plans for going back to university have been stalled. They're trying to decide what it is that they're doing next. And this crisis is really hitting them during a time when they're asking some of life's big questions. And so going forward from this, it's going to be very interesting to see how they start to make decisions moving forward. Because when these crises happen, you can start to tell that people change the way that they see themselves and relate to the world. So we still don't quite know the impact that it's going to be having on that younger generation yet, but what we can tell is that their form of communication is leading the world. So before, we saw a younger generation who preferred to do things alone, but together. So for example, if you have Generation Z kids and you go into their room and you're saying, well, why don't you go out and play outside or go hang out with your friends? It doesn't take long before they look up from their video game as they're playing and they say, oh, I am playing with my friends. You see, they're doing things alone, but together. They were really the trendsetters of using technology to work remotely for entertainment and for education long before many of us were forced to here because of the crisis that we're in. So Generation Z is really the leader, the trailblazer in many of the communication norms that we're starting to see. So I'd encourage you, if you have Generation Z kids, to ask them questions, learn from them, find out what it is that they've found works well when it comes to building community. Because this is a generation that has done an incredible job of finding, building, and growing community online. I think a big fear for generations who didn't grow up in a social media era, that the relationships that are built online aren't as strong or as important as the relationships that are built in person. And I certainly think that there's merit to that. There's quite a bit of research on that, and the power just of physical touch and how many different things go off in your brain by just shaking someone's hand. It's incredible. I think as humans, we're built for human touch. So I'm certainly not, supporting a future where we're not connecting face to face. But because of the future of the economy and certainly the situation we find ourselves in, realizing that there are best practices that we can learn and adopt from and adapt to the future economy. Millennials are a really fascinating generation. They're the largest generation on the planet right now. And what we've started to see with that millennial generation is they've really started to take the lead on creating communities that are cross-generational. So you see millennial kids hosting Zoom parties with their families and, doing online fundraisers to make sure that healthcare workers have food, or relief efforts are awareness is raised for them. And so they're taking to their more traditional platforms that they're used to, things like Instagram and Facebook, to be able to share that information. Whereas younger generations are now shifting the way even communication is being shared, where the average video now being shared online is less than 7 seconds. So imagine a world of communication where we have this long form of communication where we're communicating via video chat compared to that much shorter form of communication. So what we've seen that look like is that we see companies that are actually doing recruiting videos on TikTok, people using Instagram stories as ways to onboard and train new employees. They're short videos that are very staccato that they can group together. And rather than, I think, laughing or getting concerned with a generation that has a shorter attention span, what we've actually found is it's not just the younger generations that have that shorter attention span. Us as a society have really adapted to the technology that's been placed in front of us. So the best practices that it takes to engage these younger generations, we're finding more and more, are the best practices to engage all of the generations. And so learning from the youngest people on your team to find out, what are you seeing work well? What is your favorite app? Which, by the way, what's your favorite app or most useful app is a wonderful interview question, and one I suggest all of my clients include, because it shares a lot about the person that you're looking to hire. Is it a functional app? Is it a personal improvement app? Is it entertainment? Whatever their favorite app is or most used app is one that I think is going to share a lot about who that person is. Generation X is a very independent generation. And so because of that, we're really seeing them taking care of themselves and their family. So they're really inward focused because most of them have young kids or their kids are still at home. So they're doing a really good job of kind of taking charge of themselves and their communities. But it's very much inward focused, where some of the millennials have much more of kind of a global mindset or a global concern with the issues at hand. And Generation X is doing an incredible job adapting to the technology. They certainly aren't late adopters when it comes to technology. They're the generation that sees the usefulness of it, so very utilitarian in a way. But the way that they're using technology is certainly different. It is much more useful than just kind of getting on and chatting and hanging out, so to speak. Whereas many millennials are using this form of technology just to have Zoom up all day while they're working, just to look up at the camera and see other humans there, for example. I think Generation X thinks that that's probably a little creepy, but maybe us millennials are a little bit more used to it. And then baby boomers. Baby boomers are that generation of leaders and executives and managers and owners who are doing an incredible work in this crisis as well, in leading and analyzing. They're a very analytical generation, where I started joking around about this when I wrote an article a couple weeks ago that baby boomers are probably already writing books about how we could have stopped this, because they're very much concerned with foresight and making sure that crises are prepared for. They're very analytical. And I had to kind of laugh when a couple of my clients actually emailed me and said, yeah, I'm actually working on a book on that right now. So it turns out kind of some of those trends tend to be true. So now I want to share with you some of the leadership best practices for managing these multi-generational employees that you're working with. Maybe even give you some insight if you've got some of these folks in your family or in your close circle of influence, to help give some insight into why they're acting the way that they are. So that way, as you're managing them, again, you can direct your management style in a way that's going to make sense, and maybe learn something about yourself as well. So Generation Z, like I said, is that younger generation. And I've been researching generations for 13 years. And it's been fascinating to see how much everyone hates the millennial generation, which is really my area of expertise. And I could not have been more excited when Generation Z came on the scene, because now we finally had another generation that people didn't like. It was wonderful. It was like all of it was getting shared around. The blame was getting shared around. And all kidding aside, Generation Z, we're finally at that point with the data that we now know more about them, and we can actually do some predictive indexing to determine what they're going to be like in the workplace, because they're joining the workforce right now. So what we've learned is that Generation Z tends to lead from the side. Now, Generation Z leads very similar to their Generation X parents, which I'll get to in a moment. And as this younger generation, they've actually observed their parents, which is a bit of an anomaly. Typically, when you see one generation, they rebel against the way that they were raised. And so this is a generation that actually replicated the way that they were raised, which is pretty interesting. So they lead from the side. So that means that they're not wanting to micromanage other people. They don't want to be micromanaged. They're very independent. And a big part of that is because they've been raised on technology, that they can just say, something to a smart device, and that smart device is going to provide an answer to them. So they're very independent, very entrepreneurial in a way that they're going to find the information. What that means when you're managing them and motivating them from home is to make sure that there are conditions for success for them to do well. I'm going to talk more about what conditions for success are and how you set those effectively. But that Generation Z mindset is, making sure that they have all the resources that they need, or that it's identified that they don't have all the resources. So one of the biggest challenges Gen Z has is if you tell them they have all the resources and then they're missing something. It's like saying, here, build the shelf, you have everything that you need. They open up the box, they're putting the shelf together. Lo and behold, there are no screws. How in the world are they going to put this together? They were totally confident. And now they feel like, why would they say I have everything I need? Of course I don't have everything that I need. And so rather than over-promising that they have everything that they need, I think, especially because they're young and they don't have as much experience in the workforce, helping them understand, hey, I'm going to give you this project. I'm going to give you as much information as possible. But if you need more information, here's where you get it. Here's a good resource. I encourage you to check out some blogs. So again, they're a very scrappy generation, but they need to be coached in a way that they use that scrappiness rather than get frustrated that maybe they weren't given all the tools that they need. So again, it's a very independent generation who will do incredible things when you empower them and equip them to succeed. The next generation is millennials. So that millennial generation are a lot of your young employees, young managers, young owners. And unlike Gen Z that leads from the side, millennials lead from the middle. Extremely collaborative generation. So this is a generation that was raised to be, on teams constantly. We're very collaborative in how we make decisions, very democratic. We want to make sure that everyone is on board and everyone has a seat at the table. And so what that means when you're managing people in that regard is that they're wanting to see consensus. So many millennial teams are drawn to a platform like Slack because it's a constant conversation. And that way they can, check into the different chat groups and see what's going on. They can give insight. They can access it on their phones really anywhere. But it helps them feel that their voice is heard. And that's something that's very important for that millennial generation who, let's face it, I keep saying it's me. I'm smack dab in the middle of the millennial generation, which is wonderful sometimes. But as someone who's been studying millennials for a very long time, I had a client the other day tell me, like, you're getting a little old to be considered a millennial. And I thought that was a little rude because you don't ever leave your generation. Millennial isn't just a dirty term that we use for people who are young and annoying. It's actually a generational term. So I informed him that I was in fact born in 1988, and that wasn't ever going to change the fact I was a millennial. So, but it is a generation, and we are a generation that was raised by parents who wanted to know our opinion. Where do you want to go to school? Where, what kind of vacation do you want to go on? What color do you want to paint the living room? All of these things were a part of the way that this generation was raised. And so now we're coming in and we're working for you, and we have opinions. We want to know that that we have something to say. And so during this time, it's really important to empower your millennials on your team to give meaningful insight, to take ownership of projects. One of the best things that we do when we teach folks to start onboarding programs is to train their employees to be problem solvers. How we do that is in the first 6 weeks of an employee working for you, we have that employee find something wrong in the company. It could be a process, it could be a billing question, it could be something huge, like what platform that you're using for, all your billing, or it could be something small like your email template. It doesn't matter what it is, but encourage that employee within the first 6 weeks of them working for you to come up with at least one, potentially two very important solutions to whatever that problem is. And what that does is for a new employee is that it trains them to be problem solvers, to say, hey, we don't want you just to come in here and work and go home. We want you to solve problems. We want you to have ownership in this company. And we want you to be thinking like an owner who's constantly improving the process. One of the great ways that you can incorporate that into what people are doing now, I'll share with you a few more here in a moment, but is to empower your employees to become those problem solvers. So during this time when folks are working from home, why not put out a challenge to say, hey, let's improve a great process here in the organization. Whoever comes up with the best process wins a gift card or free dinner or, a prize of some way, or just recognition. It doesn't have to be a physical or monetary prize, but find ways to incorporate people's minds so that way your employees aren't just sitting back and reacting to the experience or the world around them, but they're thinking proactively about ways that they can solve problems with you and for you. It's going to be very important when it comes to keeping the flow of energy from the season back into whatever normal is going to look like on the other side of this. So millennials are very collaborative. They're wanting to make sure that their voice is heard and that they're involved in the process. So if you see a millennial in particular, but really any employee who's not motivated during this time, it most likely means that they don't feel like they have ownership. A millennial or any employee is unmotivated when they don't have ownership in their job or the company. One of the biggest challenges that folks have when it comes to remote working is having that community aspect, which we'll talk about here in a moment. One of the research studies that we did, which I started a firm 7 years ago called the Millennial Solution, and we do training, and we have a research firm that tracks all of our and really undergirds all of the training that we do. And one of the research projects we conducted for 2 years focused on two different things. One was, and the theme was loyalty. One was, what does each generation think about the word loyalty? And the second was, do people who work full-time for a company consider themselves more loyal than someone who's either a gig worker or works remotely? Now, this was done years ago, and so the data is absolutely relevant to where we are today. Unsurprisingly, the information that we collected from this 2-year study found that millennials and younger employees in general consider themselves more loyal, this is important, more loyal to a company because they liked their work or they were more passionate about their work. Whereas older generations consider themselves more loyal to a company based off of how long they worked there. We also found that millennials were more likely to be loyal to their coworkers, and older generations were more likely to be loyal to their boss. That's why building community is so important, because if you can't get someone to be loyal to the company, which all generations rate boss and employee higher loyalty than the company itself. So gone are the days of, you work for this company and you retire, you get the gold watch, and now, you're part of this elite club. We don't live in that world anymore. And so finding ways to have that loyalty to one another creates accountability, and loyal to the boss is important as well. The second part of that study found, again, not a surprise, that those employees who showed up every day and had face-to-face interactions with their coworkers were more loyal to the company, their boss, and their fellow employees than those who worked from home. And a big part of that is the flesh and blood relationship that employees experience with the company, the accountability that they experience, and the ability to see the impact of their work. So we'll get more into that in a moment, and how people feel fulfilled rather than just doing the work, hitting enter, and making sure that it's done, which we've all been guilty of a time or two, checking off that box. But the key is making sure people know that what they do matters. So speaking of checking off boxes, Generation X is one of those generations that also leads from the side. So like I mentioned, their kids, Gen Z, leads from the side. Generation X leads from the side as well. And so they're a generation that doesn't want to be told what to do, doesn't want to micromanage. Just tell me what I need to do, send me an email, and I'll get it done to you by today. You don't even need to tell me how to do it. I'll figure it out. I think the mantra of Generation X is, if you want something done right, you do it yourself. Very independent, solves problems extremely well and extremely efficiently. So during this season, you're seeing Generation X really thrive, because even if they didn't work from home before, they're finding systems and figuring out how to do things on their own. They're really good at compartmentalizing, whereas millennials grew up in a world where they're, talking to their mom while they're at work and making a dentist appointment, sitting and waiting for their boss to show up for a meeting. There's been an integration from a very young age, professionally and personally, for younger generations, whereas Generation X is very good at compartmentalizing. They're also really good at checklists. So I give a lot of my Gen X colleagues a hard time because they're constantly making checklists. Sometimes they put things on the checklist that they have already done just so that they can cross it off. I'm not sure how or why that works, but apparently works for them. And it's something that Generation X is very, very good at. So if you're managing that Gen X person from home, making sure that they have very clear, very achievable goals so they can cross off that checklist and move on to the next part of their day. Baby boomers are that generation who leads from the top down. They're a very structured generation. So they're a generation who were raised by parents who said, because I said so, that were very structured, almost militaristic in a way. And that's just the world that they grew up. That there was a very clear line between home life and work life, and never the two should meet. And there was a very clear distinction between those who were in charge and those who weren't. So I've worked with a number of major companies all over the world, from Expedia to Comcast to Microsoft, and the military here in the United States quite a bit. And it's always fascinating to me, particularly with those folks in the military, how they were trained to have that very structured mindset. And part of it is because that's literally how these organizations are structured. It's very, very, very much shaped like a triangle, like a pyramid. And so the farther away that person is at the top, the more important they are. Whereas younger generations see accessibility as a superpower, whereas older generations saw accessibility as something that is to be earned. So you can see currently how that's a bit of a challenge for many baby boomers who are now working from home, is because it used to be, only a certain amount of people can get to me, only a certain amount of people can see me, maybe in my element and see my home. Now it's something that everyone is invited into by need of by necessity more than anything else. And so that's shifting, I think, the role of what a baby boomer leader is really like. So that's something to keep in mind, that they're looking for that structure, for opportunities to delegate. They're very good at delegation, like I mentioned, very good at analyzing things. And I don't know if it was a mistake or a strategic question. I was talking to a baby boomer friend of mine who is a Wall Street banker, and I asked his opinion on kind of what was going on and kind of his insight, just kind of in a casual conversation. And 30 minutes later, he finally asked me, if I agreed with him. He had not taken a breath or changed his tone for 30 minutes. So he is a part of a generation that, again, very analytical, has a lot of opinions, a lot of things kind of figured out, and is excited to share them. So making sure that you're, again, creating a system that's going to make sense for someone who is a baby boomer, who's looking for delegation, clear lines of responsibility, whereas a Generation X person doesn't need a title as much as a baby boomer person, and a millennial wants more collaboration than any of the other generations combined. Like I mentioned, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat box as we jump into some of the kind of core elements of the management and motivation aspects. Again, I want to make sure I'm answering your guys' questions. So there are 3 core elements to some of the management best practices, beyond just keeping in mind your generational team. I'm going to share with them with you here in a moment. So number 1 is to set up your team and yourself for success. Now, one of the core things that comes with setting yourself up with success is knowing what are the conditions for success. I think a lot of times we talk about success, we talk about productivity, we talk about achievement, but we don't actually measure what that looks like, and we don't create a picture in our mind, a story of what success looks like. So one of the great ways to do that is to have your employees, especially if they're not used to working from home, say, I want you to come up with your ideal day. And I want you to either tell me if we're over Zoom or type it up and send it to me. But I want to know, what is your ideal day? What time are you waking up? What types of food are you eating? Who are you talking with? What types of things are you getting done? How do you feel at the end of the day? Humans are so story motivated and story oriented that oftentimes we miss an opportunity to get people to buy into the solution by creating that opportunity for them to paint a story in our head. Think about it. We don't think in words, we think in stories. We think in pictures. We think in movement. So if I were to tell you, I want you to go to your kitchen and find a lemon and, take out a knife and cut open that lemon. And as it's just sitting there, just juicing, I want you to take your tongue and I want you to lick that lemon. If you're thinking about it, your mouth's probably going to pucker. You're probably going to be like a little sour look on your face. Just simply talking about licking a lemon created a physical response for you. So a great way to create those conditions for success for yourself and for your team is to create a mind picture story that they're then able to play over and over again, that they can consider what are those conditions for success. It's not just the output of how many things am I getting turned in, am I hitting all of my goals? That will come, but create a story that they can become the hero in, so that way they're implementing some of these best practices I'm about to share with you. There are also great best practices that we've used with our team where we set an intention for the day or for the week. And it could be something small, like we're going to focus on not using social media during our core work hours. So put your phone away, put it in a different room, uninstall the app, whatever it is. So we'll create a challenge and say, hey, can someone take the challenge on? So that way, excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. So that way people can take ownership, again, that's a big component of it, in improving their lives. Rather than saying, and we've learned this working with young workforces, is that if you tell them, no, you can't access technology, you can't go on social media, they want it more, all the more. They're saying, don't put your hand in the cookie jar, they want to do it. But if you create a challenge or a program that they can participate in, they love it. They get excited about it and they're fully on board. So that's a really great way to do it. Going beyond just time blocking that I think many of us are familiar with, we focus on what we call Brilliance Hours. And this is a concept that we got from a wonderful book called The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. If you're looking for a book to read with your team during this time, check it out, The One Thing. I don't have it here at my desk. It's usually right on my desk because I've read it about 12 times. It's all about productivity and making sure you're doing the right thing at the right time. And in the book, Gary and Jay talk about having these brilliance hours. So for them, it's from 8 a.m. to noon. And during this time, they don't check their email. They don't respond to anyone else. They do whatever they're brilliant at. So for me in my brilliance hours, it's writing. It's how I've been able to write 6 books. So no one touches me. I don't talk to anyone. No emails responded to between those hours when I'm doing my writing. So talk to your team, find out what those brilliance hours are. Maybe it's not 4 hours, maybe it's 2 hours if they've got kiddos at home, but find time that they feel brilliant at, that they can create that buffer. Another really great way to kind of set those intentions are also too with group chat. So finding encouraging ways to include people, encourage people, and make sure that you're creating a culture within your company. You could have 2 people on your team, but create a culture where you're encouraging one another on a daily basis. It's more than just saying, let's touch base when we need to. The important thing right now, more than ever, is to create culture, whatever it is you're doing and wherever you go. All right, number 1 was set them up for success. Number 2 is to keep them on track. Keeping folks on track is more than just accountability. It's making sure that people feel empowered to get to where it is, whatever it is that they need to do, wherever they need to go. Feedback's a big part of that. Most people give feedback terribly. So most people give feedback in a way that they're saying, you're doing a great job. I really like you. Please stop doing these 3 things or else we're going to have to fire you. But thanks for being a part of the team. And that's how they give feedback. And it's terrible. It's not helpful. None of those things. We teach feedback on what we call the stoplight. So red is stop doing this, and here's why. Yellow is keep doing this or improve on this. You're doing okay, but here's a way that you can do it even better. Here's a template. Maybe that's a great way to do it. And green is keep doing this, and here's why. So if you have someone who's not turning in materials on time, saying, I need you to stop doing this, red light, because when you turn in your work late, it means that I have to spend extra time reviewing it and turning it into our clients, which means we're less likely to get hired back because they value punctuality. It means that we don't take them seriously. It's a sign of disrespect, whatever that reason is. Oftentimes we don't take the time to explain why when we're providing feedback. So creating a great feedback mechanism is really important during the season. Finding a great way to give that feedback is also important. The tickle's back. Sorry, I don't want to cough in your ears. I'm drinking just straight coffee. It's 8:30 at night. I'm drinking coffee, so I'm never going to sleep after this. You guys are worth it though, thanks. An important thing to do is to find out how people want feedback. This is a great season to do it. I hired a young man a couple of years ago, and I asked him, I said, how do you want to receive feedback? Like most people, he says, oh, I'm great with verbal. Just tell me what I'm doing and I'll change it. After 3 weeks of me giving him verbal feedback, he wasn't changing. I was doing the stoplight, all of the things where we were working on it, nothing was changing. And then I started giving him verbal feedback and sending him an email with what it is that we talked about. Instantly, things started to change. So people may tell you that they want feedback one way, but in reality, they actually need feedback in a different manner. So use this time to touch base with your team, find out how they need feedback, and give them feedback in a way that's going to be really important. Another way to keep them on track is to have them share how they're keeping themselves on track. So a great thing to do is have kind of a pump up call once a week where you have folks come on and share something that they improved on this week or a system that they've put in place. Have them come on and do a lunch and learn about a platform that they're using that's helping them manage their time better. Putting them in charge of teaching other people what they're learning is a great way for them to keep themselves accountable. Again, great people will, even if they don't believe it, if they teach it, they start to believe it more and more. So finding ways for them to teach some of the things that they're learning, some of the best practices, and again, take that ownership. A great example is, say you've got folks on your team and you want to pump them up and make sure that they're doing well with managing their time, have someone at the end of, on Friday, come on and do like a quick 20-minute presentation on ways that they've been able to manage their time better or lessons that they've learned on managing their time. Then vocalizing it, even if they're not good at managing their time at all, you're now going to be able to start to see some of that shift. Because again, it's internal change coming from internal to external versus the external going internal. So there are two types of motivation. That's very important to keep in mind. There's intrinsic, which is internal, and extrinsic, which is external. And finding out how your employees are motivated is going to be important. Hint, most of it is internal. So if you find ways that gets them going, gets them excited, maybe it's recognition, maybe it's being a part of a team, maybe it's money and metrics, and that's fine too. But finding what it is that your employees are motivated by, and then tying, again, those conditions to success to that core motivation is going to be really, really important. I would say, kind of to round that out, there's actually 5 core motivators. So I said it was being a part of a team, money or metrics. You might want to write these down so that way you can find and ask questions around them. It is recognition, so external recognition like an award or a job promotion perhaps. It's giving back, so making sure that they're giving back to the community or giving back to their family. And then it is personal growth and development. So saying, I wanted to run a marathon and I ran a marathon. I hit my goal, I hit my steps. So those 5 core elements are really important to keep in mind, that that's some of the core motivational aspects that every single person on this planet is motivated by at least one, usually more, but at least one of those 5 elements. The third element, so like I said, is setting them up for success, keeping them on track, and the third is building community. Like I mentioned, if you're not building community, you're not going to retain your people and you're not going to get them to give you their best, because people are loyal to each other more than they're loyal to the boss and more than they're loyal to the company itself. They're great ways to build community right now. You can do something as silly as having a Friday song where, you know, some person rotates, but they get to share their favorite song or a funny video or something, and that is sent around via whatever platform that you're using. Them coming on, someone coming on each week and teaching maybe their favorite recipe, sharing their favorite recipe and actually walking through how they're making it. You could do, you know, a lunch learn of them sharing a skill that they've learned or developed. One of the fun things I'm seeing people do is good news, where they're starting every meeting by having someone share a story that they heard that's heartwarming or funny or entertaining, and just setting the mood in a different way, rather than coming to every single meeting as, what are we doing and when are we getting it done by? Creating stories and sharing information. It doesn't have to necessarily be personal. Some folks aren't comfortable with that. Excuse me. But making sure that you are creating a community that's going to shift from this virtual work from home. If you're going to go back to a traditional workspace, making sure you're keeping this great community and this great momentum moving forward. So I want to share with you the 3 questions to ask every single person on your team to switch them from having a reactionary mindset to taking ownership in their role. So here are the 3 questions. I can send them to you guys afterwards. I'll give you my email and I'll send you these questions. The first is, how can I support you? Specifically, is there anything in your way that's holding you back personally or professionally? Now, why I say personally, certainly right now, mental health is something that's really important. Finances are really important. Just life at home can be difficult. And if your employees think that it's appropriate, they can certainly share it. It's not something that you necessarily want to ask them to do anything that they're not comfortable with. But understanding where your employees are coming from, where being at home could be something very, very difficult for them, or it could be wonderful for them. And so being sensitive to the background noise, the environment that they're experiencing when they're coming in to do work for you virtually every day. So find out, how can I support you emotionally, in your work? And is there anything that I can remove from your schedule, from your load, from your responsibility list that's going to help you do your job better? The second question is, and it's probably one of my favorites, it's, if you could change just one thing when we get back to work, maybe get back into the office, what would you change and why? If you could change one thing when we get back, what would it be and why? And it's such a cool question. You're getting people to think creatively, and it's kind of a, I call it a magic wand question. If you could do anything in the world, what would it be? So asking them questions now that they're removed physically, because I'm a huge believer, if you want to change your mindset environment, you need to change your physical environment. So we're working from home, it's a different physical environment. Find ways to creatively problem solve that maybe you were stuck on before. And the third question is really powerful, and it's, what has this experience taught you about yourself? What has this experience taught you about yourself? It's a really great way for them to think reflectively about how they've been developing, how they've been giving back, how they've been using this time. So I really believe during the season, we had 2 options. We can either consume media, we can consume, for anything like me, consuming carbs and pizza and waiting for things to return to normal, or we can create. We can create solutions, we can create relationships, we can create opportunities that maybe weren't there before. We can create space for our minds and our bodies to heal. And so we have these 2 options in front of us. And in this season, it's a huge opportunity for all of us, no matter where we are, what our role is, and what we're doing every day, to take a seat, take some time to reflect, and realize that we're much more in control of our happiness, of our destiny, of our success than we ever thought we were before. So I want to encourage you, and I'll leave with these 3 things, and then I think I have a few minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box so I can make sure to get those before we run out of time here. But I want to share with you, you will be a winner coming out of this if you decide to take this as a huge opportunity to go deep as an organization to reinvent yourself, to not only have better managed and motivated employees, but to think completely differently about how you serve customers and clients, how you do work every day. Use this as a total makeover of who you are and what you do in a positive way. You will come out one of the shining stars, because there's a new economy on the other side of this, and those that take the time to reflect and to rebuild are the ones who are going to win. Those that are going to lose are the ones who try and go back to normal, the ones who try and return to how things used to be and take those bad habits back with them. The ones that are going to lose are the ones who aren't doing the inner work. They're not looking at this as a time of personal reflection, and they're not considering how they can use this as an opportunity to give back and emerge stronger than ever. So that's really what I want to leave you all with. It's a huge opportunity. We spend a lot of our time helping companies connect purpose, the purpose of the individual employee with the purpose of the company, going beyond just mission. And I don't have a lot of time to go into it. A lot of it is in our book, Keep Them Longer, which you can kind of see. I think it's on mirrored right now. Maybe it's just for me, but Keep Them Longer. You can go to keepthemlonger.com, keepthemlonger.com. And you can figure out how to get a free copy. I think we ship to Australia, but it's free. All you have to do is pay for shipping. And we'd love to be able to send you a free copy of this. I can send you those 3 questions to ask as well. If you want to go ahead and send me an email, we'll share with you my email as well. But in our book, Keep Them Longer, we share how do you help your employees find their purpose and connect it to your purpose at work. Because how we define purpose is what you have inside of you to help other people. Your mission statement is what you do and how you do it, but purpose is what you have inside of you to help other people. So I want to go ahead and jump to any questions. If you guys have any specific questions you'd like me to address, anything that I did not get to or something you want me to bring clarity to, I want to make sure to leave some time for that. But if not, you guys can go ahead and log on to, again, keepthemlonger.com. and go ahead and sign up and get your free book. There's also a Gen Z guide, I think, that you have access to as well. So if you're interested in how to hire and motivate the next generation, those youngest employees coming into the workforce, we go ahead and we have a guide that you can download and get access to immediately as well, for those of you who like those instant gratification downloads and you don't want to wait for it to come in the mail from America.
Thank you, Gabrielle. This presentation was fantastic. There were some great ideas and information that I'm sure we can all walk away with.
Great, wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and type my email also too in the chat bar. I think I can do that and make it public, but I think that it will also be sent around, which is perfectly fine. It's Gabrielle@millennialsolution.com. If you have a specific question or again want access to those 3 questions that I shared with you, by all means, I would love to be able to answer those for you.
Lovely. I will also send Gabrielle's email as part of tomorrow's follow-up email with today's recording. So I'll include that part of the email. So if you do have any questions, as Gabrielle mentioned, feel free to shoot her off an email. And obviously you can review the recording. Doesn't appear that any more questions have come through. So I think on that note, I'd like to thank you, Gabrielle. As mentioned before, it was a fantastic presentation. So thank you for your time, and especially considering how late it is over there. So I think we'll leave you to it. But thank you also to the participants who stuck out and watched the presentation for the generous hour talk that you've given us.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for having me. I had a wonderful time, and I hope you all have a wonderful time working managing and motivating your workforce from home.
Thank you very much, and good night to you, Gabrielle, and may everyone else have a great afternoon. Thank you.